welcome to Take Me Home, the podcast offering a social democratic alternative for the politically homeless. I'm Hilary Salt.
And I'm Sebastian Moore.
And we're delighted this week to be joined by the Social Democratic Party's new head of policy, Adam Hibbert. Welcome, Adam.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for having me.
It sounds like a very exciting role to take on, Adam, but maybe very challenging. Are there particular things you're looking forward to?
Well, yes, it is. It's a great honour and a great responsibility. Yes, so I'm enjoying my first round of policy development already, and it's exactly what I was hoping it would be. It's a very open and creative process, but I'm looking forward to sharing the details with you.
Great. So lots of people who are watching will not be members of the Social Democratic Party and maybe don't understand anything about not just how our policy-making process works, but how any political party's policy-making process works. So do you want to give us some kind of broad overview of how it all operates?
From what I can tell you, so it varies, obviously. There is a different vested interests involved in different parties. The Social Democratic Party, being entirely free of them, is a particular sort of head start that we have. We don't have any donors to please in our back pockets with a sort of burning agenda of interests that they expect us to fulfil, which is a burden that the larger parties tend to carry. So where the Conservatives, the Labour Party, the Lib Dems will begin from is a broad set of commitments that they've made through conference. And what's come up through conference will be issues that have been either sponsored by someone with a hobby horse, or it'll be something that's sponsored by one of their donors. So the interesting part, I suppose, is the where the members are motivated by something that they've been influenced by, and there are a lot of influence groups attempting to get their agendas onto the statute books via these political parties. So you have what you will have heard of described as think tanks, but also a number of campaigning charities, professional associations, a number of different third sector civil society organisations who have a lot of detailed ideas about what they would like out of the government, and that's quite a if you want to talk about a Westminster bubble, I think that's probably what you're looking at. It's that range of organisations who are desperate to get their agenda past the government.
So, sorry to interrupt, but I was just going to say, somebody listening to this might think, Adam Hibbert, he's the head of policy, so he decides policy for the SDP. So it's all on you. You just get to pick something out and say, I fancy doing that. And that's not quite the case, is it?
No, I think if that had been my plan, I wouldn't have been chosen to do the job. We are a democratic party, and fundamentally, my bid to do this role was a bid based on the concept of democratic process. I'm a profound believer in democratic process. I think the way I'd say it is, when you want to get to know a person, the best way to do it is to see what they do. And the same thing goes with the party. If you want to understand where a party's coming from, you want to look at how they act, how they behave, what their processes are. And I think for the Social Democratic Party, it's important that policy begins with the membership and it's developed by the membership and it's approved by the membership as we get to the end of each policy review cycle. So it's a fully democratic system, and for me that's critical, because the organisation of a political party is the promise of how we would be in government. If it's your habit to make policy top down or off in a corner with a chap with deep pockets, then that's what the electorate can expect of you in government. If your habit is much more towards listening, learning, understanding what matters to your members, to the voters, then that's the nature of the government they can look forward to. So I think we need to walk the talk in how we develop policy, and that authenticity will come through for voters.
There'll be lots of issues where most members of the party will agree. There will be some members where they might significantly disagree. And there might be other areas where perhaps there's areas of agreement and areas of disagreement. How do you negotiate all that?
Yes, indeed. I think, this is the great thing about democracy, right? It's nothing is a foregone conclusion. So I think it demands of all of us a certain amount of, not thick skin, but a willingness to compromise, and a willingness to rub along with people who don't think exactly like us. And the SDP is a very pluralist party in many ways. We're not the sort of ideologically, directive kind of an organisation. So it's important that the way that we develop policy reflects that. It needs to be common sense, it needs to be evidence driven, it needs to be really addressing the problems that the majority of Brits face. And I think that's the sort of the core of it, is if we can all agree that these are policies that make a positive contribution to the British people. That's not to say that there will never be conflict as we develop these policies. And for all of those situations, ultimately, there will be moments where we vote and we agree or we disagree with a policy. And it'll be, as with a conference resolution or as with a vote in a branch, it'll be a matter of where the majority is clear that a policy is fit for purpose. A minority of us, in some cases, will have to say, well, I've lost that one, but I support the overall agenda. So it's a good rehearsal for what happens in government, in Parliament.
It's that loser's consent thing, isn't it? That you need that.
100%. And I think, I don't know if I'm alone in this, but I think I would be surprised if there's anyone in our party who is 100% sold on every single policy.
No, I'm not.
I appreciate that. I value that balance of conflicting or different perspectives, at least. And one of the things that I've done with the first round of policy that we're developing is on each of the working groups, on the 3 strands that we're working on currently, I've tried to make sure that I've got a couple of people from different ends of the conversation, because inevitably you surface different evidence, different rationale, and it makes for a much more creative research round and much more robust policy, I believe.
So where does policy come from? if I go to join the SDP, and at the moment we have all of this list of policies that I quite like. What's to stop it changing in a couple of years' time, and we suddenly have a completely different set of policies?
So we have some commitments in our constitution, some principles which are laid down that are fundamental, that aren't going to change.
And can you give an example? Not to put you on the spot too much, but can you give an example of what those commitments look like? Because they're quite broad, aren't they?
Yeah, I don't have the Constitution in front of me, but it's some sensible principles around the social democratic perspective on domestic and international affairs.
Yeah, I think just from my memory, it's a commitment to a fair voting system, a commitment to good provision of public services, things like that.
Yeah. So
it's quite broad things, but then.
Oh yeah.
So how do we go from having a philosophy as a political party to then having policies? Who directs that, and where does that come from? Because you mentioned before that the other parties, stuff will be suggested at conference, and then that will give the head of policy or the policy team a directive of what they need to be working on. How does it work in the SDP?
So with us, we have a policy governance board with the leader, the national chair, and the deputy leader, and myself. We are setting the overall direction for policy development. So that's really taking in the feedback from ourselves and for the people that we engage with politically, and understanding where the priorities are for developing policies. So, as you say, we've got a robust, rounded suite of policies, but we know that these things move over time, and the conversation around us moves over time. So it's a constant matter of testing, learning, understanding where we need to be telling a stronger story.
And that's quite an intellectual process as well as a practical process, isn't it? I went to see, do you know Robin Ince, the comedian? Went to see him a couple of years ago in Edinburgh, and one of the points he said was that I so wish I'd been right-wing because there's so much less reading.
Yeah.
I do think whenever we want to talk about anything, somebody will say, well, here's a list of reading, which is good.
I think that it's not really to the Conservatives' credit that anyone could say that and for it to really resonate. Because actually there are quite a lot of really interesting right-wing thinkers who are just not read by any Conservatives, who should be better known. But we are not interested to some extent in becoming a think tank or being too intellectual. We're very much focused on grassroots issues and solving problems for families and communities. We're not having highfalutin conversations about this or that ism.
Great. So you mentioned before that you've got a few policy strands that you're currently looking at. Do you want to maybe pick one or two and maybe tell us a bit about them?
So, we have, as you know, we have probably the greatest position in terms of industry. I think we've got a really clear story at that sort of macro level, but we have had a sort of a gap in how we explain our approach to small business and to supporting small enterprises. So that's an important piece that we've been wanting to fill for a while and now can. We're a couple of weeks into the research phase on developing an SME policy. So that's a priority for me this round. We have two others, one on disability and one on sex-based rights. Sex-based rights, we've had a sort of an agenda-setting policy for the last few years. It was the policy actually that brought me to the SDP a few years ago. And with disability rights, some of the key variables are implicit in how we talk about care and how we talk about the allocation of resources in various other policies, but we haven't pulled it together. And it's obviously a very hot topic at the moment. So although we'd chosen to do disability a couple of months ago, clearly with the hand fist that the Labour government's making of it at the moment, that will be quite a critical story for our candidates to be able to tell in May.
And you mentioned May because of the local elections.
Yes. Yeah, it's all about candidates in the end and giving them the ammo they need.
So as head of policy, I'm sure you need to be quite impartial and need to look at every policy and it's in the right way. But do you have a particular area of policy that you're most interested in?
Well, I've I've been involved in understanding the whole culture war through the lens of gender identity politics for the last couple of years. It's not something that I want to spend a huge amount of time on myself. So in general, my interest is in social solidarity, by which I mean how do we get back to a higher trust society where the solidarities of the family and the community are nourished a bit. I think we've been through a period where all of those social solidarities have become a bit threadbare and a bit frayed at the edges, if not completely worn through. So that's where I'm looking. It's a whole suite of issues around that to do with healthy economies, a sort of a conducive legal framework around people's lives. That reaches into all aspects of policy making. So it's a bit difficult to narrow it down to just economics or just a particular part of rights, education, what have you. Social solidarity, I think, is the missing ingredient in a neoliberal world that's too fluid and where people aren't knitted in and supported by the relationships around them.
So I think we should talk about the implementation of policy and how you can actually deliver on the things that you want to. But before we do, I just wanted to say that for people that are wondering, people might look at this and say, look, it's all well and good having a great manifesto with brilliant policies, but government after government gets elected on a manifesto and then barely implements any of it and actually then comes out with a whole load of new stuff, which is what we're seeing with Labour now. I mean, it was only 7 or 8 months ago, the election, and yet all this stuff they're coming out with, most of it is new stuff that wasn't in the manifesto. So how do you deal with that?
Well, it goes back to what I was saying about getting to know a party, right? I think that kind of issue fundamentally comes down to trust in the party and trust in the principles that motivate the individuals you elect. We have, as you say, Labour and Tory and Lib Dem in recent memory have all gone back on election pledges, and they've all conspired effectively to deliver the same stuff as before the election. So I think the only impactful vote that I've been part of in recent years has been the Brexit vote. And because it was a referendum, there was it was very hard for them to row back from it, much as they tried. So I think it does come back to that question of trust, and that's why it's really important for me that we are telling a story that comes from, from the heart, that we've all worked on together, and that we're all clear on the rationales for it, the principles behind it, and we're signed up for those values. Because I think that's what voters respond to. When voters are embracing another upstart party, they'll probably do it on the basis that they like the chap in charge, right? Because they trust. That's what you see in infuriating liberals across the Western world, is people putting their trust in obvious charlatans, but they're charlatans that speak from the heart, who aren't telling the usual mendacious, fibs, fundamentally. So we should be aspiring to get to that level of connection with people through an authentic expression of our values. And because we have common sense behind us, and because we have a properly democratic process that brings all of those different perspectives together in a healthy way, I think that's quite a devastating combination when we get it right.
So how do you convince people that, how do you convince people that what you're pledging in your manifesto is deliverable, and how do you actually deliver it? And I know that's probably less sort of your area, but in terms of being head of policy, but go on.
Yeah, I think it is a conversation that the policy secretariat needs to be really focusing on. Because as I said before, policy it's partly about what you're going to do in government. It's partly about helping voters understand where you're coming from. And so there's probably a list of 1,000 things we'd like to do on disability rights. But what are the 6 that we're going to use as our constant drumbeat in a given election? We need to bring a few up to the top that we think are both massive priorities and sort of game changers, but also which help someone understand what on earth is the Social Democratic Party. We have this double job. People think they know what the Tories are. They probably don't, but they think they do. And with the Social Democratic Party, they won't necessarily know from the outset. So all of us who go out on the campaign trails talking to our fellow citizens have this sort of double task. It's not just what can I do for you, but also this is who I am.
I know that we've got quite a lot of people campaigning now in local elections. Most of the policy that we set through the policy making process is kind of national policy, international policy. It's big picture stuff. But a lot of the things that are important in a local election can be almost micro stuff. They can be absolute opposite end of the scale. How can we use some of those principles, big principles that we might have set, to establish more local agendas and policy making, if you want to call it that, for a local election?
Yeah, I'm obviously we start from family and community in our sort of logic as a party, and I think that's, for me, again, it comes back to this solidarity point. It's that if you're thinking on the hoof about what needs to be done in your particular situation, you have those social democratic principles of that basic, the value of those human relationships. And that's where everything good comes from in local organisation, in schools, in healthcare. That's the bedrock. So I think that's a sort of useful starting position for any of those. We do have, obviously, fairly worked out agenda for education, for health, for the family, how to reinforce them, how to nurture them. But yeah, it's absolutely critical that we've got that clear set of values in common guiding those decisions. And that's, it goes back to the whole Pericles thing of the reason we win in these wars is because we've all thought about what's going to happen together, and we've got the advantage of democracy behind us.
That sounds great, yes. And do you think people are actually managing to use those tools to deliver that message on the doorstep?
I think it's a struggle, to be honest. I think people have been living in a binary political world for too long.
Yeah.
And it's tough to be winning people's trust and trying to shift that set of expectations that they bring to a conversation. So it's tough. It's not an easy sell. At the same time, people are utterly exhausted with the nonsense from left and right. So when you come at it from a central position, a social democratic position, in some ways that's a breath of fresh air, and a lot of people will happily grasp it. So it's just a matter of sticking to common sense and being open to the obvious opportunities. We aren't, again, I think it's really important to stress, we're not about being intellectual. We're about doing what will help the working families of Britain.
And if people want to know a bit more about SDP policy, if they're perhaps not members of the Social Democratic Party yet, where would they go to find out more about our policies?
Well, I highly recommend the website. I think that's the best place to start. We have a selection of documents on there, both individual pledges and policies around particular areas, but also green papers that go into a bit more depth on a couple of areas, on the economy, on farming. There's a good lot of resource there. And
that's sdp.org.uk. If there are members who are listening who perhaps don't read their newsletter,
I don't know why they wouldn't read the newsletter, Hilary. It's written very, very well.
It is, of course. But if there are those people and they don't perhaps know how they can get involved in policy, that's where they need to go, isn't it? The newsletter. They need to follow the links in the newsletter to see how they can get involved in these discussions internally.
Yes, and they can contact me, and they can find the contacts for the Policy Secretariat in the members area of the website.
Excellent, and we'll put your email address along with ours in the show notes.
And of course, if you're not a member of the SDP yet and you want to influence policy, then the way to do that is to join.
Very necessarily, yes. We don't take policy instructions from outside the party.
Absolutely.
Unlike some.
A little dig there at the end. Okay.
Thanks, Adam. That was great. That was really helpful. So generally in that section of the podcast, we talk about solutions, don't we? We talk about bringing me solutions. And I think what you've done there, Adam, is to show people how we develop those solutions so that we can bring them to the party when we need to.
Mm-hmm.
So, Adam, we might give you a little rest for a moment while we do our Culture Club items. So, shock for this week. Sebastian, you have something to bring to Culture Club?
I do have something, but it's also... I'm feeling like we should talk about the art gallery. And I know before we started recording, I said I wanted to talk about Liverpool Cathedral.
Yes.
Which is magnificent. But I thought the art gallery probably has a bit more resonance with everything we're discussing. So is that all right?
Yes, of course.
Sort of throw that a curveball there.
Yeah.
So Adam won't know this, but we had our Northwest Social on Saturday, which was in Liverpool, and we went to the Walker Art Gallery, which I think was was very interesting. I often come away from an art gallery with a couple of favourites, and I didn't. There was nothing really particular that stood out. I know that there was for Hilary, and you're gonna. I'm gonna come to you in a second. The art gallery itself is in a beautiful building, and Liverpool I just think is a magnificent city. And I get a little bit of stick from Hilary for saying that because of the Manchester-Liverpool rivalry. But I really do think it's a beautiful city, and it feels very different to Manchester. It feels a little bit more open somehow, a little bit more seasidey, which I suppose makes sense. So you come out of Liverpool Lime Street station, and there in front of you, you've got St George's Hall. You walk past St George's Hall, you've got the library, you've got the art gallery, and these are magnificent buildings. I just think
museum.
It's beautiful, and the museum next to the library. So we had a look in the library, and the first room we went into was a room of sculptures, of statues, and I was like, okay, not really my sort of thing, but sure, I'll have a little look.
Just to correct you there, we walked into the art gallery. You said library there, so we did go to the library for a cup of coffee, didn't we?
We did. Did I say library?
Yeah.
Okay. No, library is for books. Art gallery is for pieces of art. And in this room full of the sculptures, I started reading the bits next to it, which you've told me before I shouldn't do.
Yeah.
So I should listen to Hilary. But I got to one bit and it said it was talking about how the white sculptures were reinforced ideas of white supremacy in Victorian Britain. And I shouted over at Hilary and I said, "Oh, you didn't tell me it was going to be woke." And she sort of just shrugged her shoulders like, "Well, that's inevitable." Which was a shame because every single piece referenced slavery. And I say every single piece, that's perhaps exaggerative, but really most of them. And what's a shame is it dilutes it, because if there was one piece that talked about slavery and had a link to slavery, it'd be quite interesting and then you could actually learn something. But when it's just put in your face all the time, you can see that there's an agenda and you just, it's boy who cried wolf. You just start to say, well, okay, I'm not going to pay attention to that, which I found a shame. But there were some nice pieces of art. And surprisingly for me, I think my favourite piece came in the contemporary art section, which is really surprising because I generally like much older art. And there was an artist called Graham Crowley, and I'm going to try and put, for anybody that's watching the video, I'm going to try and put a picture of it on screen right now. And this was a piece, this room of his exhibition was, all of the pieces were one single colour, yellow. And there was something amazing about how that washed out yellow look, and you could see all of the colours that should be there. I just found that really, really interesting. And this particular piece, I think it was called Kerry Moon. To me, it just reminded me of a farm in Kansas with those big skies and the foreboding clouds. And that was my favourite piece. Did you have a favourite piece? So
they were yellow and grey, weren't they? And I think that person has entered. So he'd won they have an annual prize, an art prize, and he was the winner this year. But I think he had entered it about 16 years on the run or something like that. So determination, that teaches you, doesn't it? So well done him.
Yeah.
I had a couple of favourite pieces. There's a fantastic Rossetti in Dante's Dream. And I do love those kind of very romantic paintings. One of the things that I know you and I were both looking forward to seeing was Waterhouse's Echoing Narcissus. But sadly, that was on loan to Hamburg Art Gallery. So
I hope the people of Hamburg are enjoying it.
Yeah, sadly we didn't see that. But the other one I just wanted to mention was maybe you can put this up on screen, Sebastian, so people can see it. I'm sure you'll recognise this. Fantine. It's by Margaret Bernardine Hall. So I'm just going to read you the little thing just to kind of reiterate the points you made. So this is a painting of a mother watching over her child. Very dark surroundings, and her face is lit up and the child is lit up. It's beautiful, beautiful painting. This is what the words say. This is Hall's most celebrated painting. It depicts the literary character Fantine, who featured in Victor Hugo's novel Les Miserables. Dismissed from her job because of her illegitimate child, she was forced into becoming a sex worker to survive. This striking and sympathetic image shows Fantine protectively watching over her sleeping daughter. Hall, that's the painter, was born in Wavertree, Liverpool. She was the daughter of the wealthy West Indian merchant Bernard Hall. His fortune was made through his mercantile involvement with the transatlantic slave trade. The family wealth meant that Margaret Hall was able to travel widely and receive the best artistic training in Paris, where she studied for 5 years. And as you say, it just feels very undermining of the art. It doesn't really say anything about slavery or anything. All it says is that, you know, we want to make this kind of show of the fact that we are different to the way it was then, and to me it's just very wearing.
And if their point is that every single painting in there can be traced to slavery, because that's how far-reaching slavery was at that time, then put a notice up at the start of the museum and say, by the way, we could draw a link from all of these paintings to slavery, and then you've got your point across, and then we can move on. I actually, because I really hate all this culture war stuff. I'm getting to the point where I'm so bored of it, and I know that people will say, well, you can't be bored of it. You've got to fight these battles, and it's important not to let untruths be said. But I just thought I wanted to see some art today. I didn't want to have these political feelings. And I genuinely mean this, because I said it to a friend afterwards, I have sympathy for people whose worldview consists of that. Because if they see a white sculpture and think, this shows the ideas of white supremacy that people had, I think that's a really nasty way of looking at the world. I think it's very one-dimensional, but it would make me feel rubbish all the time. And so I do have sympathy for people that view the world like that.
What do you think, Adam? Any views?
Yeah, it comes back to so many different cultural strands, doesn't it? That there is just this one lens that people put on any aesthetic experience, as if it's that simple. And it reminds me of something. I think it was Jan McFarish at the Free Speech Union said something about remembering busking it in an exam at uni and not having the full grasp of the thing, but realizing that she could tell a story about colonialism or something, and you know, and recalling that reminded her how actually all of this slightly kind of cuts you off from the experience itself.
Yeah,
I agree with you, Sebastian. I think it's impoverishing people, because they're, instead of engaging with the artist's intention and anything to do with the artistic language or the form of it, it's all a political, sociological narrative, and it's just soul destroying, isn't it? Yeah. It doesn't allow any space for the human connection to come through.
So to raise our mood, shall we go to the cathedral?
Oh, okay. I know what Adam's culture club item is, and I thought that's not going to raise our mood, but we'll come to that in a second. So just I think this is a bit of a, what would you call this, an addendum culture club item. I'm making up for the fact that I usually have nothing. Liverpool Cathedral. Wow.
So which one? I think you have to say.
Firstly, the wow can be for both, because the Anglican Cathedral, I mean, maybe I'm biased here, but the Anglican Cathedral is spectacular, absolutely spectacular. But the Roman Catholic Cathedral is not bad. It's a very modern building, the Roman Catholic Cathedral, if anyone's been to Liverpool. There were plans to build, I think, the biggest church in England, or one of the biggest, in the early part of the 20th century, and those plans never came to fruition. Time and time again, they were brought back, and they just never worked out. And in the end, they sort of compromised and built this very modern, concrete cathedral, which I have to say, I'm not a particular. It's not my taste, but it's sort of interesting to look at. And inside, it's wonderful. But moving on to the Anglican Cathedral, that's the biggest religious building in the country, and the 8th biggest religious building in the world, which I think was really surprising to me that it's in Liverpool. That is just it's just an architectural gem. I think it's absolutely magnificent. You walk in, it's massive, as you can tell from that stat. And so there's got lots of different features to it, but my favourite is this bridge that goes across. And the bridge was constructed originally as a way of as a place for the organist to play, but they changed their mind on that. But they still had this bridge, and so to me, it's like a bridge with no purpose, which I just think is beautiful, because there doesn't need to be a purpose. It's beautiful, and that's enough.
Great.
Yeah.
So good news there. So,
yeah. I've raised the mood, and now Adam's going to bring it back down, I reckon. Go on,
Well,
tell us about your Culture Club item.
Well, I was going to be a bit more plebeian than you two and talk about the TV, because obviously this week has been, everyone's been talking about Adolescence, the Stephen Graham drama, and I thought it would be worth just having a quick think about that.
Yes, please. Yeah.
So you may have missed it, and I won't. I'll try to avoid any spoilers, but it's basically a play in 4 acts. There's a dramatic dawn raid in the first act, and a child is arrested in front of his parents from his bedroom. The second act follows the detectives as they go through the school in a chaotic and scary kind of school where there's all sorts of drama. The third act is this child in detention being assessed by a psychologist in a really intense 2-part, two-hander. And then the fourth act is the family at home coping with the community reaction to what's going on, and sort of reconsidering their choices as parents over their lives. So it's a right whirlwind, and it's 4 very different segments in the story, which is quite an interesting way to tell a story. And the other thing that's, I think, really notable about it is, like, I don't know if you caught Stephen Graham's Boiling Point film back in 2021, but he did an hour and a half film of the life, a night in the life of a chef, and it's done in 1 take.
Wow. We know how difficult that is, don't we, Sebastian?
So, and that's what they've done in Adolescence. Each of these 4 episodes is a single take, I think. So it is a real sort of heart-stopping drama each time. You're waiting, you don't really realise it, but you're waiting for that breath that you naturally take when you're viewing something, when there's a cut, when there's a change of scene, and it doesn't come, and it doesn't come. And they get in the car, and you're on the outside of the car watching them driving the car. And then, you're with the action all the way through. So really interesting formally how they put it together. I quite enjoyed it. I think the fourth act we could have done without. I think it could have ended on 3. But it was a really interesting set piece from Netflix. And of course, the reason it's become such a discussion point is because it was then raised in Parliament as a very important thing, and it was overladen with all sorts of culture wars issues. And yes, Starmer accidentally called it a documentary at the dispatch box, which no, because it's very clearly fictional. But it's quite fun, I thought.
So I don't have a TV, so I haven't watched it, and
I don't have Netflix, so I haven't watched it.
But every now and again, I hear about a TV drama, and I think it's something that is really familiar to my childhood. And I think we had probably like a 50-year period where there was, maybe you might not be able to call it a monoculture, but there were certain TV dramas that everybody watched and everybody would talk about. For me growing up, it was Only Fools and Horses, right? That was the one that we just all talked about as kids. Now, that doesn't happen so much anymore, but this one does seem to really buck that trend. And I've been hearing about it non-stop from people from all different parts of my life. And it seems to be that the the reason that it's particularly in the public consciousness is because of this issue of the violence that's committed in the drama, and there are people are trying to make political points from this. Now, I've not watched it, so I can't really comment, but it is interesting to me how I'm hearing from people on different parts of the political spectrum making different political points based on this drama.
Yeah, and I think that's all been overdone, right? So, yes, the story's being told through the kind of constraints of how you can make drama easily. So, if you're going to have an ethnic minority actor, they better not be the baddie. And if you're going to have a white actor, perhaps they can be the baddie. And there are conversations going on around that, which I think are just missing the point, really, which is that because of the dramatic form and the tension of the way the drama is delivered, people feel like there's something momentous happening. It feels deeply involving. So there's a great impetus to try and make sense of it, and that's where this problem that you were referring to earlier in the art gallery, of everyone bringing their own lens to the thing, rather than relating to actually what's happening in the story, is what makes it a bit pointless. You can't get that unified experience because you're bringing these divisive partisan politics to it. So I think it's quite an interesting cultural moment from that perspective, because it shows up the extent to which people are looking at quite different worlds through the lenses that they bring to everything, rather than just paying attention to the art itself.
Well, as this is Culture Club, that feels like a really good analysis of the public discussion that's happening, rather than descend into the kind of discussion I thought we might be descending into around how horrible men are.
Well, that's the STP, isn't it? When we're nuanced and you don't know, you can't predict.
Absolutely, yeah. Great. Well, thanks for bringing that to us, Adam. That was really, really interesting. So, thanks everybody for listening, watching. Don't forget you can join the SDP on the website, sdp.org.uk. We'll be back later in the week with a news special because we have the spring budget this week. So we feel we have to cover that. So we will be doing that.
And I'll be talking about happiness.
And you're going to talk about happiness, aren't you? So we will see you later in the week for that episode. We'll put all the links to everything we've been talking about in the show notes. Please like, share, subscribe, tell your friends about the podcast, and we'll see you later in the week. Thank you.
See you next time.